And here we go. Finally made it. All right. Welcome to Tuesday training. Welcome to Tuesday training for practitioners. This is very exciting to be here finally. Took us a couple clicks today. Took me a couple clicks today. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad that you're here. Okay. And now I can see you too, which is also very exciting. Yay. Welcome to Tuesday training. Woo, for practitioners. Yay. It's so exciting. Okay. So today I'm super happy because in the help desk, I'm being so official, in the help desk, I got a specific request for a continuation on muscles and an expansion on muscles. Reciprocal inhibition, when muscles don't fire, what do we do about that? Oh my goodness, I love this question because I have such an answer. Yes, an implementation question and also a committed action. What are we going to do about it? So that's what we're about here today. That's what we're up to. For those of you who've been here before, I know all of your lovely faces who are here at the moment on screen, so I love to see you again. And for those of you who are joining us for Tuesday training each week, we'd love to have you here too. If you can't be on camera, that's okay. Use the chat to communicate so that we can include you in the conversation. And if you're watching on the replay, welcome. I'm glad you're here as well. If you've never been here before and you're like, who's this fast talking girl? What's this all about? I'm Gina Schatz. I am both a movement and manual practitioner. I've been at the rodeo for 30 years now. I got a 30-year certificate in the mail this week. I was like, oh my heavens. Okay.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. So I do know a little bit, and so I'm here to pour into you in that way. I work clinically. I also train practitioners. I developed my own method along the way. Method is like this buzzword that some people are all for, some people aren't, but the key to the method is that it works. It's literally how I work every week with clients and have for the entirety of my career once I developed it. So that's what I really love to teach, like the how and why to make it easy to create great results. And each Tuesday, I'm here to pour into you on, Lori calls it tidbits, a nugget, a section, a handful, a mouthful, whatever we want to call it, so that you can like dive in a little deeper, be casual. It's not a formal training necessarily. Ask some questions, interrupt me, make sure I get your answers, and then boo, go off into the world and do your thing, do your magic. So that's what we're here for each Tuesday. I'm so glad that you're here. Before we dive into the material that I promised for you today, I do get to make a public service. I misspoke last week, I think. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. I didn't go back and rewatch the replay, but I think later that I caught myself in a misspeak. So if so, I get to clear that up because we get to have clarity so that we can implement all this goodness. Last week, we talked about the rotator cuff muscles. Actually, we talked about a mashup because we've been talking about muscles all month. And in the mashup, we talked about rotator cuff muscles again. The sits muscles, capital SITS being the acronym that helps us remember the name of the 4 rotator cuff muscles. And the rotator cuff muscles largely does rotation. I think this is where I misspoke. While there's 4 muscles in the rotator cuff, only 3 of them rotate. 2 of them do lateral rotation of the shoulder. 1 of them does medial rotation of the shoulder. Because I'm correcting what I might have misspoke, I'm not going to quiz you, but the 2 that do, but I'd love to, the 2 that do lateral rotation are infraspinatus and teres minor, and the medial rotator is the subscapularis. The 4th muscle in the rotator cuff in the sits group, the supraspinatus, it doesn't do rotation. It does what they call guarding the glenohumeral joint. And that's really where I focus when I talk about rotator cuff. Yes, it does rotation. It kind of gives itself away in the name. And for those of us who are working with pain and alleviating pain and remedying pain and preventing pain, what I wanted us to focus on and what I do focus on with the rotator cuff in my own work is the stabilization factor. When the stabilization of the rotator cuff isn't happening, that's where people actually create most of the injuries that come with the rotator cuff. So I was focused there because that's where I focus. And all of the muscles in the rotator cuff have a stabilization action. That was really the emphasis that I wanted you to have a takeaway. In fact, the first 3 muscles, the SIT, supra, infra, and teres minor, that they're described as reinforcing the capsule, the joint capsule, the joint itself. So that's the reinforcement. And the subscap, we've already said, guards the glenohumeral joint. So you can see like the reinforcement and the guarding. There's a lot of like activity there to hold the humerus onto the torso. So yes, it does rotation, only 3 of the 4. And this other piece, I think, is often overlooked for us when we work clinically, and that's usually where my focus is. So I apologize if I misspoke on that and set you down a rabbit trail of how many of the 4 muscles actually do the rotation. I didn't mean to make, lack of clarity. I really wanted to emphasize the stabilization piece. And 3 of the 6 muscles, the same first 3, supra, infra, and teres M, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor, they stabilize also in action when the humerus is abducting, so moving away from the body. So while there's action happening, phasic muscle action happening, there's also this big component of how do we stabilize, again, the humerus onto the torso so that it can move and be safe when it moves. And the stabilization part, again, is the focus, because if the joint isn't stable, if the body isn't aligned to create an equal meeting of those 2 bones at the joint, then all movement is precarious. And that's true everywhere in the body. It's just extra highlighted in the design and description of the rotator cuff. So hope that clears it up from last week. And it's actually a great place for us to start today, because we are talking about when muscles don't do their job, what's up? Sometimes it's their alignment. And so we're going to get into that as we move through our material for today. So here we go. Muscles, reciprocal inhibition, and when muscles don't fire, what do we do about it? For those of you who are taking a deep dive, hey, round up. For those of you who are taking a deep dive into muscles, our community, love our community so much. Our community is deep diving into muscles. So our mastery practitioners in the year-long track are wrapping up right now a really awesome but dense muscles and movement course. It's available to all practitioners. You don't have to be in our mastery track to join or to get the learning, if you will, from that course. And all of our mastery practitioners have taken the course at least once, and they're reviewing it because we all get to review our muscles and movement. Me too, right? I just shared that with you. Hi, Cheryl. Nice to see you. So there's a study group going on right now on muscles and movement. I'm not hosting it, but one of our advocates is hosting it. And one of our other advocates is here, Lori. Would you be willing, Lori, to tell us a little bit about the study group, since you're closer to the hot activity that's going on in that group?
The hot activity of it. I love it. Yeah. So the study group was it was designed, actually, Danielle, I don't know if some of you know Danielle, she's an advocate and a TSM grad, is hosting it. And what about muscles and movement? I've been through, when you said how many times have you been through it, I think, 3. I'm going through it now, and it sort of feels like I just learned it, and then my mirror neurons kick in and I'm like, oh, I do know some of this. So I think sometimes we get caught up in like, I've got to learn all of it at one time, and like our brains just aren't quite capable of that. I don't believe so. So getting back to why we did the study group is because muscles, getting them all in can be really heady. And the study group was designed to support everybody in that, not just grads. It like literally anybody that would like to participate.
Yeah.
And it's a lot about, it's not like we're going through and like, this is the glute max and these are the functions, this is what it does. It's not that. If you're looking for that, yeah, I know Gina's like, no, it's not that. It's like, oh, I have a client that presented and this is what's happening. Mm-hmm. And can you support in that? Mm-hmm. Like it's case studies. It is specifically about muscles. So if there's a question that pops up about a specific muscle, then everybody kind of pops in and chimes in. Mm-hmm. So that's what's around it's a study group. Like think about your study groups when you were in college or high school. Like it's a meeting of the minds. It's supporting. It's also a confidence builder. It's, I know that I might know this and I can support you in that. And we hear things differently when different people say it.
Yeah,
So
for real.
that's my long-winded sense of what's going on.
Oh, I love it, Lori. It's really valuable to hear what's actually happening inside the study group, because not everybody likes the term study group. We're like, oh God, not more. But I want to add to that. One of the things that I love okay, great. Thanks for adding the link, Lori. That's great. One of the things that I love about group learning, well, I love lots of things about group learning. That's why I set everything up as a group learning, including the courses that are pre-recorded in the academy. There's a group. You're like this, but watching the replay. And I like that. While it's informal and it might not be everybody's favorite flavor, there's a lot of value in hearing other people say the same thing, hearing other people ask questions that you ask or were thinking about asking, because then you realize, oh wait, I'm right here, like with my people, and it's a perfectly appropriate question. Brittany described going through muscles and movement again in the study group as a confidence builder, because like you said, Lori, you do know some stuff. Like you all know some stuff, and we tend to focus on the things we don't know and like take ourselves down because of it, instead of just accepting we just don't always know everything. Like it's like an endless lifetime, process. We're all evolving for the entirety of our time here. So it's helpful to remember like, oh yeah, I do know stuff, which you wouldn't necessarily take yourself through on your own. You'd have to hear yourself answer someone's question or already have the answer to a question. And the more we build our confidence, the more free we are to be present, to then do the work. And that's the key. You got to implement what you know. Just being book smart is not going to build enough confidence to create the results that you're looking for as a practitioner. I promise you, I know that's the truth. So yes, you want to know everything, and you want to be implementing while you're learning, not wait till you think you know it all and then go implement. I see a lot of practitioners hold themselves back for a lot longer than they need to because they fear they might make a mistake. Look, you guys, I just showed you just at the start of today, I made a mistake 30 years in and I still make mistakes, right? Like we're not talking about mistakes that hurt people. I understand do no harm. I'm talking about like, just give yourself a little leniency on maybe not having everything memorized, but implement anyway. And the study group being live and with other people, you get encouraged to implement. And that's one of the things you said, Lori, that I want to highlight. It's big, like I'm big on implementing. You got to learn material that actually applies so that you're interested enough to lean in and learn it. And then you got to apply it immediately, implementing into the work that you're doing so that you can sort of check yourself and see if this is valuable information and how does it make it easier for you. So all those reasons and more, I think the study group's an awesome idea. When you guys came up with that, I was a big cheerleader for it. I'm not there in the study group, so you guys are free to, join, and, there's no hot seating that I know of. At least it's not from me. Maybe Danielle's hot seating at some point, but I'm not in there hot seating. And so I'd love it if you guys felt like that would be supportive to you and creating what's next for you if you joined us, and the study group's free. Like there's no fee for the study group. So if that community type of learning while you're comfortably at home behind your computer in your state works for you to be in community, please know that that's there. I don't know of another group that does that. So I'm super excited about it.
I have one other thing, Gina. It kind of, oops, did I freeze?
No, you're here.
Oh, I am. Okay, I froze on my end. You know what just occurred to me also is like how we learn, right? Like I love Tuesday training because we're all like kind of spitballing everything. And like, if I don't know something, somebody else jumps in and then it lands differently. It lands differently rather than watching a pre-recorded, not that those aren't valuable. They're like a foundation. And then these are like, oh, implementing my language with people. How do I collaborate? Like I think it's more than just, like you said, Gina, getting the information in. It's like, oh, I got the information and now what do I do with it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can't hide in a group. The group's going to call you forward. They're going to ask you a question. You're included. Whereas even when you're watching a replay of a group, you could have your back to the camera cooking dinner. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. But that takes away from your implementation. It takes away from you being courageous or nervous and saying it anyway or trying. Right. So I love the live group. I love the live group too. Awesome. Anything else we want to share about the study group, Laura? Anything else? Thanks for putting the links in for those who are interested.
Yeah, I said I'd do it last week and I didn't, and it's okay. I will put that in the student lounge, the schedule. I'll share it here too, but it feels a little long for the chat, but I'll do that also. Yeah. And then I'll share it in the student lounge.
Okay, so without running through all the, thank you for sharing. Without running through all the line items of the schedule, what is it roughly? Is it like once a week?
I think it's every
7 years. What is
yeah,
it?
let me just look at it. Oh, you know what? It looks like they meet every 2 weeks.
Okay.
The most of the schedules on a Monday, and it is 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. So wherever you're at, just do the flip it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
Okay.
it looks like I'm looking down through. Yep, it's all Mondays, 6:30 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay, beautiful. Yep. And again, I know they're not mandatory. You don't have to show up. It's not like all or nothing. And I've been asked if I would host the replays. So yes, they're recorded, and I am hosting the replays inside our academy. So all of that, I think we covered all the questions. If there's any other questions, yeah, if there's any other questions that come up, please let us know. I'm happy to give you more details if that serves you.
Yep. And one other quick thing, they're rolling through it pretty condensed, if you will. So I'm looking at the last one would be December 11th of this year. So we're not where it's not like a 6-month study group. It's pretty consolidated.
Okay.
The next 3 months. And that is all I've got.
All right, great. And that's actually longer than the course was live. So when I taught it live and when I do teach it live, well, first of all, I've taught it in a weekend and crammed it down. That felt comfortable for everybody who was choking, I'm sure. Also, the course, as it sits in the academy, the 25 hours was in a month. So it sounds like there's a little bit more breathing room in the study group schedule, which is great. How long are each of the sessions? Each of the study group sessions, Rhonda, or the course? How long are those study groups? Are they an hour, Lori?
I think they're an hour.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, great. Love it. Okay, my friends, so excited. I know a couple of you came in while we were talking. Sylvia, nice to see you. Who else did I see pop in? Rhonda, I think I said hello to you officially. Joan is here. Nice to see you here, although I can't see you, but that's okay. Nice to have you here. Pauline, it's great to have you here. Okay, great. I think I've greeted everyone, which is beautiful. All right, let's jump into muscles today, yeah? Okay, you guys ready for this? Okay, you're ready, Valerie. You're ready. I know you're ready. Okay. So the question that came in today, which I want to get to, is what happens when a muscle that we know the action for isn't doing the action? What do we do? How do you solve that? And it's an interesting question to ponder. I think to get to the answer, we need to know a couple things. First off, you do need to know your muscles, which we've kind of just been talking about, right? And sometimes it takes a while to learn them all. There's over 600 after all. But even if you're just focusing on the phasic muscles, 150 roughish, that's a lot to learn and what they do. So we need to know what the muscles do so that we can tell if it's firing or not. Sometimes we mistakenly think a muscle is supposed to do a job, and it's really not supposed to do that joint action. And so we're sort of spinning around ourselves instead of getting to the muscle that's supposed to do the job. So that's where our responsibility comes in as body workers. Our base of knowledge really should be clear on what muscle does the action. And when I say action, it means two things. It means contraction. So contraction is the action. So we're not looking at what muscle is stretching. We're looking at what muscle is contracting, because contraction is the action. And when the muscle contracts, what it does is create movement at a joint. So we talked about this last week too. The qualifier for movement, I don't mean it creates yoga movement or it creates Pilates. I mean, it creates joint action, a joint movement. And we've spent some time here, and I highly recommend doing it in this way, learning the joint actions first by name and by visual, so that when someone has their arm out, you know what this action is, which then leads you to what's the muscle that does that action. What's the muscle that does that action? so that you can then be observing folks in their body positions. And you don't have to be a movement practitioner for that to be valuable. So again, I said this last week, and I think it's worth repeating a few times. You don't have to, you can be a manual practitioner, and it still is relevant how your clients are moving, because it's the movement or inefficient movement or lack of movement that's causing the pain. And so if you're a manual practitioner doing all the work to get rid of the pain, alleviate the pain, you got to know what's causing it. The type of movement, the inefficiency in the movement, or as we start looking at muscles in concert, who else is doing the movement, part of the inefficiency. And if you're a movement practitioner, of course, that's like straight up starting point for you. How does the movement happen efficiently? So we really want to know the movement at the joint and the muscles that create that movement. And that's how I teach muscles. First, like one guy does the contraction, one muscle guy does the action, one muscle guy does the contraction, which is the one to look for, the biggest prime mover, the biggest culprit, if you will, of that joint action. And the reason that's really valuable is because if it's the main guy and you know the main guy, it's kind of like memorizing the capitals of all the states. You might not remember every city in the state, but if you roughly know the capitals of all the states, you can sort of iron that out in your brain for geography. Same thing with joint actions and muscles. If you know the main guy, he's probably the one you need to look at first. So just know the main guy and then get, 80% of a chance of resolving the problem. And then you get to stack on your muscle knowledge. That's the way I think it's valuable to learn. And I say that coming from a long background in learning muscles. My background of the first place I learned muscles was in massage therapy school. So we learned all the muscles, all the attachments, all the names of all the attachments, all the tendons and where they attach. Great detail, minutia. Told me nothing about hip extension or when hip extension happens. So I didn't have it yet on how to resolve the pain, even though I knew the names of the parts. So again, back to applying it. How does it actually work? How am I interfacing with how it works? How is it interfacing with itself? The way it works, or some distorted version of that? And then I get to intercept that as the practitioner. So I really think that in order to ID when a muscle's not firing, it's worth it to step back a few steps and be like, well, what is the muscle that's supposed to be firing? Because what's the action that needs to happen here? What's the joint action that needs to happen here? And until we have that, we may be sort of going after a muscle or blaming a muscle and, spinning out and spending our time in places that aren't creating results. So that's first step. And then let's assume now that we do know the main guy, and the muscle that was brought up was, for example, if glute max isn't doing its job, how do I get it to do its job? And now here comes the hot seating quiz, pop quizzes. You ready? So now my question is exactly as I just laid it out for you. Well, what is the job of glute max?
Extension of the hip.
Yep, extension of the hip, hyperextension of the hip, if you call extension standing. Cool. So we know that when the thigh is behind the body, and it's not the thigh that's doing the moving, it's the joint is where the action happens, right? So when our back leg is in a lunge, or when we're in between steps, the muscle while we're walking, it's the leg behind us that's in hyperextension or extension. Great. That's glute max's main job, to bring this femur behind the body. And really what it's doing is it's creating movement here in the ball and socket joint. Hope you guys can see that. It's creating movement here in the ball and socket joint that then looks like visually, if you're using your eyes to check, it looks like the thigh is behind the body. Great. Okay, so that's the main job of glute max. So if that's the main job for it to contract, we know that every joint is built on a lever, meaning that one side of that lever is contracting and the other side must lengthen for the contraction to do the action. It's a two-way street. And the action is contraction. The action isn't stretch. So I've said that a few times, and you'll continue to hear me say that because that's how it got clear for me in my brain. And that's why I teach it in that way. And if you want more on that, we have our anatomy guide. I'm happy to send you the link to that too. But staying with our topic, if hyperextension of the hip is the main job of glute max, and glute max isn't doing that job, there's a few places that we get to look. The first place always, when you're looking for muscle contraction, is whether or not the structure is aligned. Meaning, is the body in an aligned position to be able to get those muscles to contract? So if we think back to the rotator cuff, just bear with me here, but come with me on this conversation. At the beginning of our talk today, and I brought up the rotator cuff again, while the rotator cuff has a lot of movement, rotation in it, and abduction, etc., we learn from the design of the rotator cuff that stabilizing that joint is important for the movement to happen safely. And I would say that anytime we're not in alignment, the joints aren't stable because they're not aligned. I know those words can be interchanged, and sometimes if that doesn't add clarity for you, let me know and I'll back it up. But let's say, for example, let me fold up Murph's legs. I'm going to give this back to you with hyperextension of the hip and the alignment conversation, okay? So excuse Murph and his weaknesses. He's very hypermobile. Excuse him for his weaknesses. But let's say, for example, if as we're looking at a person, at a body from a side position, excuse me one second, let me let in Jacqueline. If we're looking at someone from the side view and we're using our visual assessment skills, would you say largely that this pelvis is in alignment? It's in neutral alignment? Great. So if the pelvis, great. So if the pelvis is in neutral alignment, then that means that the joint has a better chance of being in alignment as well. And that's where the action at the muscles happen. You're all nodding, makes me so happy. Okay, great. So now let's look at this person from a side standing position. And now they're standing looking like this. Does that pelvis look neutrally aligned? No, a couple things could be happening. Could be a posterior tilt, could be forward of the axis, could be. But what we know for this conversation is it's not aligned. So if it's not aligned, that means that there is an action happening at this joint that's not neutral. So from its starting position, it's already starting out against the 8 ball. So if I were to have a pelvis in this position and then ask the glute max to do hyperextension of the hip, that joint's already got an action in it, which means that muscle's not available to 100% to do hyperextension of the hip. It's already involved in some other thing. We might not even be action. It just might be a misaligned starting point. So that matters. So if the glute max isn't firing, the question is your person aligned to begin with to do the job? That's the easiest place to start because you don't have to run down the rabbit hole of all the muscles, but you do get to know what optimal alignment is. And sometimes that's also what's next for us on our learning curve. Cool, no problem. We do talk about that a ton in my academy because that's what we're up to. That's how I work, which is why I'm teaching this to you. There's another kind of alignment that I'm going to mention here and then add it on at the end, and that is internal structural alignment. So it's possible, for example, that you could see someone standing from the side and their pelvis looks neutral, but there is a misalignment in their pelvis itself between the bones. So at the joints, where joints are formed. Does anybody have an answer for me? This might lighten the load for you a little bit. What is the definition of a joint? Meaning, how do we know that there's a joint in the body? When what and what are?
Where two bones meet?
Yeah, it's like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Blah, blah.
Blah, blah. So where two bones meet, that's the definition of a joint. It's possible that you could look like you're standing upright, but where they articulate, it's a little off somewhere. And that's an internal alignment, and it matters just as much when it comes to muscle contraction. It matters just as much as the guy standing in that tilted, posteriorly tilted pelvis that I showed you a minute ago. So there's two different types of alignment. Neutral, don't mind Murph and his missing hand. I feel bad for him because he's really turning into be quite a mess. But so there's neutral pelvis standing. There's not neutral pelvis, so not in alignment standing. There's neutral looking standing and a disparity between two joints. Pubic symphysis could be off, the SI joints could be off, and lower vertebra as well. Could also be that something in the knee is off, which is the bottom half of the femur, right? The femur makes up both half the hip and half the knee. So there could be a juncture between where two bones meet where it's slightly off, also prevents the muscle from contracting fully. So we get to know alignment first to remedy a muscle that's not working. After, of course, we've identified the muscle that does the job and whether or not the job's happening. Okay. The second piece I mentioned, started to mention already, which is the lever functioning? So again, learning muscles, we know that all joints function on a lever. When a muscle is contracting, it's moving the joint in one direction by contracting and pulling it there. And the other side of that joint, the muscles lengthen and allow the movement to go in the direction of the contracting muscle. The easiest way to look at that lever system is at a hinge joint. So not the shoulders or the hips, so elbows, right? So, and I've used this one before, and I love this example because it's super clear. If I want to bend my elbow, let's see if I can do this with Murph. I don't know if I have enough hands for this. Yeah, if I want to bend my elbow, what's this joint action called at the elbow?
Flexion.
Flexion of the elbow. So notice when we review what we do know, it makes us feel a little better. It gives the brain a little reward system. I highly recommend it when you're learning something new. Give yourself little doses of feel good. It'll help you keep going with material instead of just pile driving the material on and feeling exhausted at the end. So this is elbow extension. And in order for this joint, elbow flexion, thank you, Anna. See, I do that sometimes. I say and I don't even hear what I'm saying. Thank you for calling that because I prefer to be clear.
Oh,
okay. This is what, Val? No? Okay. So this is elbow flexion. Let's see if I can do this here. And we've already said that the joint action happens through a contracting muscle and that muscles pull. They don't push. So I know that the muscles here pulling to make this joint formation look like this. You don't have to name it a yoga pose. You don't have to name it a Pilates pose. We're not in a gym necessarily. We're just in joint action, right? So you don't have to be a movement practitioner to do joint action. All right. So in order for this elbow flexion to occur, we've said this muscle, a muscle here pulls, which means a muscle here lengthens to allow it. So if you just look at origin and insertion, this is not where the muscles are, but just go with me. If you just look at origin and insertion around this joint, if this is the length of the muscles in neutral on this side of the joint, and this is the length of the muscles in neutral on this side of the joint, and again, I'm using this as an example, so just go with me. We know that this is how long they are when there's no action happening in the joint. So you use your visual assessment skills and show yourself that if this is the length of the muscles on this, muscle fibers on this side, when the elbow comes into flexion, look, the striations move towards each other. They get closer, shorter on the contracting side, which tells us they get longer on the lengthening side, right? Same thing would happen. In order for me to do that, I need one more hand, and then my fingers would pull apart on the posterior side of the elbow, okay? So lengthening has to happen for joint action to occur, and the joint action is created by the muscle that contracts, primarily. Okay, so if we can't bend the elbow, and this muscle does feel like it's contracting, and we do see activity going on, and maybe we're palpating if we're manual practitioners, and we're like, hey, this guy is doing it. Why isn't the elbow bending? The next place to look is on the opposite side of the lever. Is this guy holding fort and not lengthening? And if that's the case, then my lovely practitioners, you get to stretch and do deep tissue striation work, blah, blah. We don't want to start with stretching to correct movement, because that's not how movement starts. It starts through contraction, which I've said a few times in other trainings, and I will continue to preach that till the cows come home, or until Murph can no longer. No, I'll still talk after Murph can't work. Okay, so that's the second Anna.
Okay, you hit on a point that I really need clarity on. You just finished saying, I think I heard you say that movement starts with the contraction.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not like, I always think of lever system as a teeter-totter, which means both things happen at the same time.
That's true.
Okay. So, but it's not like the tricep in the example that you have there. It's not like the tricep needs to lengthen before the bicep contracts then, because I heard you say that the action starts with the contraction. So this contracts and then this lengths. Like, what's the timing? That's where I'm confused.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. It is a teeter-totter. It's a lever. It happens at exactly the same time. When I use the phrase starting from the brain, because remember, the brain is the one that's doing all the action.
Right.
The brain is telling the body to move. So the starting of a movement as a neurologic impulse is to contract. It's not to lengthen. And the lengthening in a lever occurs in response to the contraction.
But in response to the contraction, which occurred first in the brain, but the mechanics of it are that both are at the simultaneously lengthening and contracting.
That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. And you can think about, I like the seesaw. It's been a minute since I've been in one, but I used to love them. Maybe it's because the lever system was brewing in me and I didn't know it. But think about it, when you're on the seesaw, isn't it true that one side, one person on one end seems to have more command over what happens next?
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though both are moving at the exact same time, one end of that is doing the initiating of it.
Yeah.
By power only, not by timing.
Yeah.
That's the same way a lever works in the body for joint action.
Okay.
Did that clear it for you, Anna?
Yeah, totally. Because
Okay.
my notes. Yeah.
Okay, good. Because now you're here with clarity. That's it. That's it. That's all there is to that one. You're here with clarity. You got it.
I'm
Okay.
glad you hit the QL though, and I assume that you're going to continue now with the QL because that is the bugaboo in so many situations.
Right. So we're heading. Okay. So far what we've covered is when a muscle's not working. Are there notes in the chat that I have missed? Oh, no. Okay, great.
No.
For some reason, I just saw the notification. Okay, great. Okay, so on the table for today is when muscles don't fire, what do you do? So far, what we've talked about, and we're going to continue, is first you get to know what are you asking it to do, and is that the joint action it's responsible for? You get to know that coming in. And then is the alignment neutral to allow that joint action to occur? Or is there a distortion from the start? Because we can start blaming muscles when it's not the muscle. They're doing their best under the circumstances. How about we align the circumstances? The second thing that we talked about is the lever. So assuming then that there is postural alignment and also structural alignment, which we'll get to in a second, assuming that the alignment has been checked and verified, then we look at the lever and the workings of the lever. Is the guy who's contracting? And if so, is the guy who's supposed to be lengthening? And they happen simultaneously, as we just dove into, which was great. Okay. I will stay here for 1 second, actually. There's something else I want to add to this. In the lever system, the muscle that's contracting gets to contract and the other guy gets to lengthen. A muscle can only contract if it's been lengthened first, and it can only lengthen if it's been contracted first, which means both sides of the lever must be working. The seesaw teeter-totter both people have to be participating for the teeter-totter to keep going. Which is another reason why I really stress, stop overstretching. Stop thinking that everything, the solution for everything is to stretch it or lengthen it. That might not be balancing the lever. The lever's action is contraction first. Start there. It'll make it so much easier for you. And then if you know the action and the muscle that's doing it and he's not doing it, then go look at his opponent, his lever. The other side is the agonist on the lever system. And is it lengthening? So let's continue with elbow flexion. Sometimes what happens is, and follow me on this, this is when, so far everything we talked about is when things are working the way they're supposed to work. Now we start heading into, but when all of that goes wrong, now what am I looking for? Everything I knew to be true, all the design of the body out the window. Now what? Still follow the same knowledge, still follow the same anatomy. Sometimes slowing down is the answer. So here we go. Let's say we're still working on elbow flexion, and elbow flexion's happening, meaning this guy's contracting and this guy's lengthening, but there's discomfort. But the joint action looks like it's happening, but something's off. Something's off. So should be discomfort in joint action that's designed to work with the muscles who are supposed to do that job. First thing to look for is there alignment? Because anything misaligned is not functioning optimally, and that will either be painful now or lead to pain. So the elbow is flexing, the muscle that's supposed to contract is contracting, the muscle that's supposed to lengthen is lengthened, and there's something wrong here. Check the alignment. Check the alignment everywhere associated with it. Okay, then let's say the alignment's optimal, joint action's still happening, but there's still some discomfort. What it could be is that you got to reverse yourself back into the lever. What it could be is that this guy, the lengthening guy, actually isn't strong enough to contract. Because we said that in order for a joint action to occur, the seesaw must be balanced. Both sides get to work equally, which means that this guy now has to contract for this guy to lengthen to reverse that lever. And if he's not strong enough to do his job, which is contracting, the action is contraction. If he's not strong enough to do contraction, it's going to show up in his second job, which is lengthening. So it's still a balance of the lever system, both on the contracting muscle. Right? It's 2 for 1 so far. Only one of the 4 things I gave you had to do with the stretching guy, the lengthening guy. So sometimes the lengthening guy is in duress, and it will show up in his, he's in duress about his strength and contraction ability, and it will show up when he's lengthening, because it shows up when they're working. It just shows up. Okay, so that's the next place I would go, still on lever. And then let's say, for example, those guys are fine. The contracting guy is fine. The lengthening guy is fine. They're both fine when they contract. They're both fine when they lengthen. Well, actually, that wouldn't be the case. It would be that the joint action is still happening. The joint action is somehow still happening, even though the guy contracting isn't doing the contracting, but the joint action is still showing up. How is that? And now we're back to our question on glute max. Okay, it doesn't happen as often in the elbow, so I can't give you a working example of that, not off the top of my head, maybe if I thought about it. So let's go back to hyperextension of the hip. You guys doing okay? Still feeling like you're receiving and not flooded yet? Okay, great. So let's go back to hyperextension of the hip. neutral pelvis from the starting position. We know that this is hyperextension of the hip. We know the guy that's supposed to do it is here and he's not. And we've checked the guy who's supposed to lengthen. Who's supposed to lengthen in hyperextension of the hip? Psoas, yes. Yep. So we've checked that psoas is supposed to lengthen. Rare, but let's just say he's doing it. And then in the formula I just shared with you, you also get to check that the psoas is also contracting when he's supposed to contract. So he might be lengthening, but is he strong enough to do his whole job on the lever, which is to contract? Because remember, in order for a muscle to contract, he must be lengthened first and vice versa. In order for glute max to contract, he must be lengthened in the lever first, which means psoas has to contract for glute max to lengthen, or glute max can't then contract. It's got to be lengthened first to be able to contract, and vice versa. So again, you're still working the lever. Both muscles, prime movers, both primary movers on both sides of a lever. Do that. Now we all know. So did you guys follow that? Is that good? I can't tell you how much mileage you're going to get from following the lever that way. I'm telling you, it's a game changer. It feels like it's too easy. Like it shouldn't be that easy. It's that easy. I promise.
Okay, but question, because that was like my big question on here. So exactly the point that you said that I couldn't get in my mind. So when the leg is behind in hip extension or hyperextension, does that mean that before fire, that's the glute max firing? Does that mean before we go for a walk, we're supposed to stretch our psoas first?
Depends on your starting place.
I'm trying to understand, in yoga, taking someone into, a low lunge, which obviously has both actually in opposite legs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the part that I'm not getting. Am I cueing stretching or lengthening the psoas before taking a leg back into extension?
No, the first thing you're cueing is the contraction.
But you said, okay, I thought I heard you say, okay, I'm going to shut up because that's where I'm confused on.
Okay, let me repeat it because this is exactly where it gets fuzzy. Common. Everything we've talked about right up until now is when things go well. When the body is designed the way it's designed, should be able to work it, should be able to do a lunge, no problem. The muscle that's supposed to contract should contract, the muscle that's supposed to lengthen should lengthen. So can you teach low lunge? Yeah, because you're designed to be able to do that. It's basically exaggerated walking. Hip flexion on one side, hyperextension of the hip on the other. Normal. The next step, the just one step over the hill is, but what if that doesn't go as designed?
Okay.
And that is a really important distinction. So first you get to know the design and cue to that and make sure you've got that. The design being the muscles that do the joint action and the body in alignment in that action. And I said it in reverse order because they're all still top three. Alignment first. What's the joint action you want to create? What's the muscle that does that action? That's the starting point all over the body. The very next place to look is the opposite side of the lever. The guy who's lengthening to make steps 1, 2, and 3 occur. He's got to allow it for the contraction to happen to create the joint action. Okay. From an aligned place. Just going to keep laying that in there. Okay. That's design. That we came that way. It should be that easy. It's 101. As long as you have all 3 of those pieces clearly landed confidently, cue your yoga face off. No problema. The next step is, and what happens when that doesn't work the way it's designed? Different body of knowledge. We're now in a different lane. For you, Anna, in Mastery, that's module 2. Everything in module 1 is how is it designed? How is it designed to work? Have I been knowing how it's designed to work? Have I been cueing from the way it's designed to work? Do I recognize the parts that are supposed to work? Do I have all that? The next track is, and what happens when that goes wrong? We can't really problem solve if we don't know where we're taking them back to, or where the problem happened, or how it's designed to work. You can't return them back to optimal function if you don't know what that is. So you've got to know that. I say this all the time. That's why learning anatomy, functional anatomy, is key in problem solving. And there's a whole other skill set to go in when it all goes wrong. How do I return them back to their design? And it's totally doable. The reason I share it with you and make it, I don't know if I'm making it sound easy, but the reason I shared it with you in this order is because if you just work with the design and the way it's designed, you can actually create a lot of results. It doesn't have to be, oh my God, it's like as complicated as surgery. Actually, it's just that they were standing with a posteriorly tilted pelvis, and that's why the lunge didn't work. If you just align them, then boom, magically the glute turns on. Yay, alignment first. Then the muscles can do their job. Yay. Right? Or you really love stretching and Gina told you not to stretch first. So you get them aligned and then you contract and then you're like, oh, but the other guy's not lengthening. Yay, we get to stretch. It's the way it's designed. Alignment, contraction, lengthen the other side of the lever. That's all by design. That's before anything goes wrong. Okay, when we start to get off track, it's when compensation comes in and then other guys do jobs they're not supposed to do. And how can you resolve that if you don't know the job they're supposed to do? How do you know if that's not the muscle that's supposed to be contracting when body does that thing? Because you get to know the design. This joint action means this muscle contracts and this guy lengthens. Done. Oh, this joint action's happening. Neither of those muscles are lengthening or contracting. Problem. But if you don't know that those are the muscles to do that joint action, then how do you know what the problem is? The problem being pain or functional discrepancies always ties back to how the body's designed. Because when we use the body the way it's designed, there is no pain. So what is that design? And then if people have gotten themselves into a little bit of a tangle, which we all have, then how do we untangle it? You untangle it back to its design. You got to know that design. You got to know where you're taking them. Where are you returning them to? So we'll pick up on that next week. Like what happens when that doesn't, when hyperextension of the hip doesn't happen by glute max contracting and psoas lengthening. So we'll pick up from there. How's that sound for next week? Good? Sound excellent? Okay, so I feel you guys being super thoughtful and I love it so much. And I want to make sure that we leave with some levity. So would you guys be willing to do a digestion? What's your takeaway? What was the nugget that landed? What did you get? Rather than the questions still left to be answered, what are you leaving with that you can reward, trigger your reward system with?
Yeah, I'm leaving with the fact that when everything is working the way it is designed to work, then you are contracting the muscle first. Mm-hmm. And it's only when things are not working that you tool back through to the lever system and what is lengthening.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So good. Love the takeaway. Thanks for going first, Anna.
Yeah, mine is similar to Anna. And Gina, you had to say it 3 or 4 times because I was going down the rabbit hole and I'm like, keep it easy. What's the joint action? What's the main muscle that's going to do that? What's on the flip side of the lever? What lengthens or what contracts, what lengthens? And then and literally that's it. Is one doing it? Is the other, what are they not? And I can't wait till next week. Yeah.
Okay,
So
good.
I love, yeah, it gets to be easy.
Yeah. And it's literally the premise of muscles and movement.
Right.
Muscles and their movement for the win.
Mhm.
Yeah, so good. Thanks, Lori.
And same. I mean, same thing. I mean, everything that they both just said is landing that way. Yeah.
Okay, and that's new for you, Cheryl? Was that new? Was that an aha?
I think what feels more, I think that the way that the process that you had said, like learn the joint action first. What is the structure aligned? Are the muscles lengthening and contracting? So in that order kind of clarified it for me, like,
Okay.
Understanding the order of figuring things out. So that's really helpful.
Oh, so good. I love that for you. I love it for me too, because just like you guys, it's tempting to start spinning, right? You're in front of somebody in pain. You're like, what? Order, please. Order in the treatment session.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anybody else? Valerie or Rhonda, are you given aha?
Kind of had it's probably more futuristic, because you were talking about the teeter totter and you get the heavier kid on one end and the other one flies up. So what do? We have an imbalance.
Yes.
So what do? We go recruit some friends to climb on the teeter totter to help us bring it back into balance so that we can get that teeter totter going.
Mhm.
So that was kind of more futuristic, but it was kind of an aha moment. And it was
A good analogy. Good analogy.
Yeah.
So,
What I love about what you just said, Valerie, is when we go recruit other kids, we're adding contraction, we're adding power.
yes.
Notice for those of us who like to stretch everybody, notice that what you didn't say was let the bigger kid lighten up a little bit, lengthen, release, stretch. We didn't say that.
Mm-mm.
So just keep that analogy in mind too. Like stretching's not always the answer. It shouldn't be the go-to as frequently as it is for us to solve the problem. Yeah, I love that. Thanks for bringing that back. I love the seesaw, Anna. I don't know if you said seesaw or teeter totter. I think I call them both. So
Yeah. I suppose.
yeah, thanks for that. Rhonda, are you here? And are you frozen? Oh, you're here. Do you have an aha you want to share?
Yes,
Great. I'd love to hear it.
I'm here. So I like the learn the prime movers.
Say it one more time. You broke up a bit. Say it again.
I like learn the movers.
Did you say I liked the prime movers?
Like the
Rhonda?
prime movers. We do too.
I think that's what we heard you say. It broke up just a little bit, but yeah.
Yes.
Great. The kings and queens be named. Prime movers for the win when it comes to movement. Yes. Okay, awesome. Well, super fun. Thanks for learn the prime movers, Rhonda. Yes, exactly. Muscles and movement. Yep. Beautiful. Well, thank you all for digesting. I'm hopeful that feels really light and rewarding for all of you. It was super fun to talk to you about it. I know it's a gigantic cliffhanger, but I promise we'll fill it in next week. Okay. So thanks for being here. Thanks for all the great work that you're doing in the world. If you think this conversation would support another colleague, I would love it if you would share it with them. Just let them know that it's here and maybe share the link with them as well. And you guys are always welcome to share the YouTube link directly. I will also post it in the student lounge so you have it. Okay. It's always available for you. All right. Thank you so much for being here. I'll look forward to our
Thank you.
conversation next week.
Bye.
Until